Hey, thank you, Neil. It's so great to be there. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we got you, brother.
All right, good. Want to make sure. I want to explain to everybody why you're catching me unshaven and why the environment today is a little bit odd, probably compared to everybody else that you're going to be talking to today. We left after I taught prayer meeting last night and had prayer time at FBC Farmersville. We left and drove 5 hours and got here at 2 in the morning to get in line at the San Antonio Stock Show and Rodeo. This is Sarah's prize show heifer, Mary. Sarah's my daughter. And we've loaded up Mary and brought her down here. And it's quite an experience here. I knew when I scheduled this and look at the time from past experience that I would have been in line here nearly 7 hours to get into the stock show and would be nowhere near getting into the stock show. In fact, if you'll just kind of look, there are row after row after row after row of trucks and trailers here with cattle and young 4-H and FFA kids who are coming to show at the San Antonio Stock Show. So you may hear the cattle are lowing in the middle of all of this, and the environment may look a little strange to you. But I promise that we're not going to talk things down on the ranch. We're going to talk about Baptist associations while we're here. And I'm going to just walk around a little bit because I took a nap of a few hours in the back of that cattle trailer, and I've been sitting in the car, and I'm tired of being cooped up. So if y'all don't mind, I'm gonna
Hey,
walk around and
I
burn off some energy.
just finished up with Bill.
Yeah.
And it was a home run.
Okay.
Everybody,
Yeah.
please mute yourself so that Bart can.
Okay. All right. Well, no, I would agree. Bill did a great job. I hope you enjoyed that. So, I want to talk to you about the value, about the importance of Baptist associations in the SBC. And in this, I'm going to draw from my personal experience and also from academic work. And it all starts at the local church. But beyond the local church, the first thing that we have are local associations. And I want to tell you what I think right off the bat is the most valuable thing about local associations. And then I want to just take some time to apply that, and I'd be happy to field some questions from you guys as we come to the end of it. The most important thing about local associations are that they connect real life churches and real life people in churches with one another in personal, face to face, flesh to flesh interaction. And they do that in ways that a state convention struggles to do, and that the national convention barely can do at all. And I know that there are a lot of challenges that local associations have faced in this day and time. And I want to tell you that most of those challenges arise out of failing to see the critical value and importance of local associations to all of our churches. One of the challenges that we face is that people are moving more toward church affiliations that are non-geographical and are instead affinity based. And that's something that we've never encountered before in Baptist life. And the reason why we're encountering it now is because of technology. Look at what we're doing right now. We are having a meeting with one another over electrons that stream over wires and satellite links all around the world. And it's amazing the good things it allows us to do to be able to connect over the internet. It's amazing how much closer it has brought our missionaries to us, that we're able to interact with them over the internet. And it's also amazing the way it has facilitated discussion and in many ways democratized the life of the Southern Baptist Convention for people to be able to interact over the internet. But let me tell you, for all the good things that it does, it cannot replace what happens when you take people who are geographically close to one another to meet regularly in person with one another. Because there's something fundamentally important about that. And the thing that taught me about that the most is the illness of my mother, who passed away just before the SBC annual meeting in New Orleans last year. She had Alzheimer's. She had the unfortunate blessing of being extremely healthy in every way except for Alzheimer's, and so she persisted a very long time in her course of Alzheimer's. And one of the things that we did as we eventually got to the point that we had to move her out of her home into institutional care, we got an iPad for her, and I configured it because if you really trick it, you can set the settings up where you can trick that iPad into doing FaceTime, doing something like this, where when certain people call, nobody on the other end has to answer it, because teaching your mom who's got Alzheimer's to be able to answer a FaceTime call is not easy to do. And so we were able to configure that where her kids and her siblings could call her on FaceTime and it would just pick up. And that was a sweet and beautiful thing for quite some time. However, eventually it got to the point where we were really unable to get her focused there. You'd have to make sure that somebody was in the room with her, and that person would have to keep pointing down to that screen and say, hey, look, this is Bart. Bart called you. Let's take some time to talk to Bart. And she just couldn't pay attention. But whenever a real life person, whenever her kids showed up to visit her and walked in the room, you couldn't get her attention away to anywhere else. And so as her brain deteriorated, as Alzheimer's strips away all of the surface level things, and toward the end, the only thing that's left are the deepest things that God made us to be. And as that happened to her, she got to the point where virtual interaction over the internet did not satisfy for her a basic need that she had. And I tell you, what's true of people with Alzheimer's and visible in them is true of real people and just obscured by the other things that we can put on top of it. And so your local association provides an opportunity for the local churches who are part of your association to be able to connect with one another in person in ways that affirm them spiritually and emotionally and even physically. And this is so important that I think the fact that this is true and that this is an important part of local association is borne out by the story of the emergence of local associations in Baptist churches. Churches don't have to do this, you know. It's not mandatory for them. A Baptist church can exist without being associated with any other Baptist church anywhere. But as soon as you get Baptist churches put together in history, they start forming these local associations. And they do it before they have any budget. They don't have any people who are working for them. They don't have any building or headquarters. They don't have any services really that are provided. They're not forming these local associations so somebody can talk to them about Sunday school. They're doing it because, and we have local associations because we can't help ourselves. Baptist churches, when they see other Baptist churches that are nearby, they want to have a relationship with one another. They need to. It's formed by the fact that they have members who've moved from one community to another, and so they know people in these churches, and they know that their churches are similar in doctrine, and they know that their churches are similar in mission, and so they just connect with one another. That is so valuable, and I want to talk about some of the ways that it's important to cooperation in the Southern Baptist Convention. I'm checking my time, make sure I don't go too long. It's important because, I think it's important for the health of the convention. And I've already kind of indicated that there's so much isolation that's happening in our society today. And pastors feel like they're alone. A lot of them don't really have a strong friend base to reach out to in order to be encouraged and in order to be able to make it through some of the challenges that they face. Local associations provide for that, but not just the pastor, because the role that our local associations have is to reach not only to the people who are leading in the churches, but to the churches themselves. And many times in your experience of associational life, I know that you wind up being called on to come help a church that is without a pastor, look for a pastor, and help a church that's in turmoil. sort out their turmoil, which may or may not have anything to do with staff who are there. And so you're reaching out to try to do that. That helps those churches who are pastorless or who are struggling, not just pastorless, maybe, but struggling even with budget or mission or trying to figure out what kind of pastor they can have and how they can move forward as a church that's beleaguered in some way or another. It matters when not only you show up, but when other churches that are part of your association are able to reach out and say, you are not alone in this. We are a church like yours, and we care about you and what's going on, and we're here to help you with advice and encouragement and other means as they become available to help you. If you need training or if you need other resources, we may be able to provide those for you. So I think it contributes to the health of the Southern Baptist Convention. I don't think we can be any healthier as a convention than our local associations are and than our local churches are. Secondly, I think it's something that facilitates identifying, well, let me just put it to summarize, because I think I started my time a little late and I don't want to go long. But local associations provide knowledge into our local churches that's just not possible at the Southern Baptist Convention level. People these days are thinking that somebody in Nashville actually knows the churches of the Southern Baptist Convention, and ain't nobody in Nashville. There's never been a moment in the history of the Southern Baptist Convention since 1845. There has never been one moment that the Southern Baptist Convention even knew who all the pastors were at all of the SBC's churches. Because you know that change is happening constantly with regard to that. And you also know that nobody has to report that to Nashville. There's no compulsory information sharing mechanism between all of these churches. But you get down to that local association and go visit the associational mission strategist who is serving in that office. And I promise you, that's somebody who knows who the pastors are at the churches. That's somebody who's able to do important work that arises out of knowing those churches and knowing the people who are there. One, it gives an opportunity to identify leadership, which is something that the Southern Baptist Convention has to have moving forward to be able to survive. The first thing that I ever did in Baptist life was to serve as the moderator, first the vice moderator and then the moderator of the Johnston Marshall Baptist Association, headquartered in Madill, Oklahoma. Let me tell you who all I was in that association with. I was in that association with a friend from down the road, Ken Miller. He and I commuted to Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary from there. Ken now works at the North American Mission Board. Occasionally, a guy who was a doctoral student at Southwestern would get in with us and ride down with us to Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. And his name is Matthew McKellar, and he's on faculty now at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. And then there was a guy out at Little City that we also interacted with in the local association and who served and helped the association. His name was Hans Dilbeck, and now he's the head of Guidestone. And so there was a guy named Lawrence Cox, who was a mentor to me, who served as our, pardon me for having trouble keeping up with the terminology, but he served as our missionary, as our associational missionary. Lawrence was somebody who poured into all of those men who were in that association and recognized ways that he could encourage them all to be leaders. And they were first spotted in the local association. And you have that role too, of seeing people who are able to serve and give leadership to your local association and to things beyond that. And so that's so critically important. In fact, I can say that there's at every spot in my life, a man named Harold Ray, who was the associational missionary at the Mount Zion Baptist Association in Jonesboro, Arkansas. And it was an associational camp at where God called me to preach. And at that associational camp, God just got a hold of me. And the only reason I was able to be there, the little bitty country church that I went to, that little church didn't have enough kids to send anybody to camp, but another church in our association, my mom wanted me to be able to go to camp. And another church in our association, a big church, said, she called and said, can my son go to camp with your church? And they said, absolutely. And so it's because two churches were in the association together one that didn't have a group of kids to send to camp, and didn't have an adult that would go with me, and another one that was bigger. It's because of that I was able to go to the place where God called me to preach. And so I'm so indebted to associational missions. So knowing about your local churches means that you can identify leadership. But the other thing is, knowing about your local churches gives you an opportunity to identify problems and try to head them off before they get serious. And that's something that's also critically important for local associations to be able to do. When you see a church that's unhealthy and is declining and is evangelistically ineffective, and there are all these resources, the SBC and the entities just churning out resources. We don't know who it is who needs that stuff, but you do. And you have an opportunity to identify that kind of problem. Also, the number one thing, everybody, just to touch on another national issue where people are talking about sexual abuse, and the number one thing that people ask us about is that database, and that plays an important role in what the Southern Baptist Convention can do in response to sexual abuse. Now, you want to know what I think the most challenging aspect of that is? It's the fact that when somebody is pastoring a church and somebody comes and says, "Hey, listen, my daughter says that the man who's running the youth group did something inappropriate with her," that pastor probably didn't have any training in seminary about what to do at that moment, and he doesn't know who to call to figure out how to respond to that. And he may call somebody who doesn't know any more than he does about how to respond, and may make mistakes that jeopardize the future of his church and jeopardize the future of his ministry. And so you have the opportunity to see something like that pop on the horizon, and some of you are going to be the person who fields that phone call. And at the Southern Baptist Convention, we're not looking to take that role away from you, but we would like to provide some resources so that when you get that phone call, you know somebody to call to be able to help our churches avoid a mistake that could really, really profoundly damage the ministries of that church and the ministry of that pastor. And so local associations are able to know what's happening in local churches in ways that the state convention will struggle to do and the national convention could never do. And so I'm very, very thankful for what you're doing. I know that in this internet age, sometimes it's hard. You feel like you have to sell people on why you're valuable, why you're relevant. And I think they're looking at it entirely the wrong way. In fact, can I just tell you that I think that the most important thing that my local association does for me, and that the state convention and the national SBC does for me, is it forces me to care about somebody's church other than my own, and to care about somebody's ministry other than my own. And that's a very New Testament thing. Paul will write somebody in a letter in the New Testament and say, "Hey, just want you to know, man, all the churches in Macedonia, they're rooting for you. They all know what you're going through, and they've heard about how faithful that you've been, and you are on their prayer list, and they care about you." That didn't happen by accident. That happened because Paul and Silas and his fellow missionaries, they were going to all those churches in Macedonia and saying, "I want you to care about what's happening in Achaia. I want you to care about what's happening in Galatia. Let me tell you about these other churches and encourage you to pray for them and to root for them and feel connected to them." And so local associations are doing something that is profoundly important, profoundly biblical, and God did not intend for us to be all wrapped up just in a kingdom of our own, just in our own little church, and not give a hoot about what's happening across town or across the county. And so I thank you so much for the work that you're doing to help get us out of ourselves and to get us to where we're concerned about the ministries of other churches and to connect with one another in ways that affirm our health and help us to grow and advance the kingdom together. All right. I'll stop and do some Q&A. See what time
Thank
it
you,
is.
Bart. We do have some time for questions. Please speak now. Bart, I have a question, and
Yeah.
it's another value to me, and I think you personalize this in such a wonderful way. You have a history of always making the director of missions one of your best friends. You have reached out, cared for them, cared for their family. Could you speak to the value of associational leaders having friends and developing
Oh,
those relationships?
well, I tell you, I I have always appreciated the way they befriended me, and I'll tell you, Neil, I have started trying to be that way, but I think I'll confess this for myself and say maybe a lot of us are like this. We enter the ministry young, and we don't see ourselves as qualified to be the person who mentors somebody else because we're the one who needs a mentor, and we don't see ourselves as that person that the associational missionary needs. Associational mission strategist. Y'all, I'm an old soul, so you'll got to forgive me on terminology stuff. But um, but early on, I reached a point of wanting that relationship with my AMS because they initiated it with me. And when I was at Mill Creek Baptist Church in Oklahoma, Lawrence and Sue Cox, they had me in their home for dinner multiple times. And that was a refuge for me and for my wife. And so later on, as time went on, that role sort of reversed a little bit as he aged, as he reached the point that he was no longer able to serve in that way. I preached Lawrence's funeral. I preached his wife Sue's funeral, and we built a really strong connection with their daughters, and so that has become something that's been important to me. Matt Hensley, you were talking about him. When he came, one of the things I had learned from a close relationship with AMSs in the past was that transition from being a pastor of a local church to serving as an AMS can be very challenging. Lawrence had confided in me once upon a time that 6 months after he started his job with the association, he felt like he was Jonah on the ship to Tarshish. He felt like he had left ministry behind, like he had abandoned something. He hadn't really gotten to the point yet, but he saw the importance of what he was doing at the Johnston Marshall Baptist Association. And so one of the reasons why I made Matt a member of our pastoral team, even though he got his salary from the association, and that's where a lot of his time went, was because I really felt like Matt was going to need that connection to our local church when he started missing what it was like to be a pastor. And he got plenty of opportunities to preach. He preached all over the place. But like I would schedule the Lord's Supper and let Matt come in and administer the Lord's Supper because he's not getting to do that most of the time. And that's something he was used to doing as a pastor. And I would try to arrange situations where in our church he could minister to people who were sick and could do some of the things that he had sort of left behind. And so it was because AMSs had built a relationship with me and had shared with me some of their struggles that I started being kind of on the lookout as I got to the point where I had a belly and less hair and had aged a little bit. I started being on the lookout for some of the needs of my AMSs to try to take care of them.